Analyn Coguit Joring stared at the man she once called her world, the man who had filled her days with laughter, love, and dreams. Nelson. The name had once been a sweet melody in her life, but now it felt like a cruel echo. Nelson, she stuttered, her heart pounding. She tried to swallow the lump that had formed in her throat, but it wouldn't budge. I don't love you anymore, Nelson, she managed to whisper, the weight of the words heavier than anything she had ever carried. That's it, nothing more. She didn't expect the pain to be so raw, but the shock in Nelson's eyes made her chest tighten. She had to keep her resolve. Her mind screamed at her to stop, to explain, but the truth was, she couldn't anymore. She couldn't hold on to someone who would never be hers again. His brow furrowed in disbelief, and the anger flashed in his eyes. Nelson took a step back, his hands trembling slightly as if the idea of her walking away from him was too much to bear. Is it because I'm poor? Is that the reason, Analyn? His voice cracked as he spoke, though he tried to hide the vulnerability underneath. No, she exclaimed, shaking her head in anguish. That's not true, and you know it. You know I loved you. But sometimes life changes. People change. Her words hung in the air like an unanswered prayer. Nelson didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood motionless, staring at her, as if trying to make sense of the impossible situation. She could feel the heartbreak in his gaze, and for a fleeting moment, she wanted to undo it all, to go back to the beginning when everything seemed perfect. But the past was gone, and the present was all they had. And now? Now it was nothing but a pile of broken dreams. Nelson turned away, his back now facing her. He was silent, as if deep in thought. He reached for the door, then stopped. Without turning around, he said in a low voice, Maybe this is for the best. I'm not the man you think I am, Analyn. I never was. And with that, he walked out of the room and out of her life. Again. Days passed since Nelson, no, Aldren Gregory, had walked out of her life. The name Aldren Gregory meant nothing to Analyn. She didn't know who he really was. She didn't know that Nelson, the poor, struggling young man who once held her heart, was hiding a life that could change everything. She was still trying to cope with the heartbreak, to erase the image of him from her mind. But the memories were persistent, haunting her every corner. Their shared moments, their promises, the future they dreamed of. It was all slipping through her fingers. And then came the phone call, the one that would shatter everything. Miss Joring, I need you to meet me immediately. It's urgent. The voice on the other end of the line was professional, firm. It didn't sound like something she could ignore. Her heart raced, wondering what this could mean. She found herself in the unfamiliar office, her hands shaking as she opened the door to a room full of unfamiliar faces. One man, sitting at the desk, stood out. He was older, with sharp features, a kind of authority that felt both dangerous and commanding. Miss Joring, he said, his tone low but strong. You're here because you need to know the truth about Nelson, about Aldren Gregory. The name hit her like a slap in the face. Aldren Gregory. She had no idea what she was walking into, but she was about to learn a truth that would change everything. Aldren Gregory wasn't just any man. He wasn't just the boy she fell in love with. He was the heir to one of the largest fortunes in the country, a billionaire with connections, power, and influence. The man she knew as Nelson was an entirely different person. As the realization hit her, she sat frozen in her seat, feeling the weight of the secret Nelson had carried for so long. She had no idea the man she loved had been hiding this from her. She had no idea the world she thought she knew was so much bigger, more dangerous, and more complicated than she could ever imagine. Analyn stood there, her mind reeling from the words that had just been spoken. Aldren Gregory, the man who had once been nothing more than Nelson in her eyes, was not just a man she loved. He was someone with the power to change the world around her, to reshape everything she thought she knew about life. The man she had adored, the boy who had held her heart in his hands, had been hiding a secret that would have altered everything if she had known. A billionaire, an heir to a vast fortune, Yet he had never once let her into that world. Instead, he had chosen to live in the shadows of his own identity, perhaps because he knew the impact it would have on their relationship. What does this mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The room around her seemed to close in, the walls growing tighter with every second. She could feel her heart beating painfully in her chest as the truth settled in. The man who had called himself Nelson had been more than just a lover. He had been a man living two lives, one with her, the girl he loved, and the other, the life of a billionaire with endless resources at his disposal. Could it be possible that the man she had fallen for had never truly been the one who loved her? Or had his feelings for her been genuine all along, hidden beneath layers of secrets? The man sitting across from her, who had introduced himself as a representative of Aldren Gregory, looked at her with quiet understanding. He seemed to know the storm brewing inside her, but he also seemed to recognize the confusion she was struggling with. "You have to understand, Miss Joring," the man continued. "Aldren didn't keep this from you to hurt you. He did it because he knew you would never accept him as he truly is. The world he belongs to is dangerous, powerful, and full of enemies. He didn't want to drag you into that world. He wanted to protect you." His words felt like daggers to her heart, but the part of her that had always known Nelson to be different, to be more than he let on, began to surface. Could it really be true? Was he protecting her all along? "You're telling me that Nelson, no, Aldren Gregory, kept this secret because he loved me?" Analyn whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. The man gave a curt nod, but it wasn't a simple answer. There was more to this story than she could ever have imagined, and in that moment, everything she thought she knew was thrown into chaos. The days following her discovery were a whirlwind. Analyn could barely focus on anything else, her mind consumed by the revelation of Aldren Gregory's true identity. Everywhere she went, she saw him in the back of her mind. His smile, his laugh, the touch of his hand. All those moments now seemed like lies, not because they were false, but because they had been built on a foundation she hadn't understood. But why had he never told her? Why had he kept this secret for so long? It was a rainy afternoon when she finally decided to confront him. The air felt heavy, like it knew the burden she carried. She stood outside his office, her hands trembling as she prepared herself to face him once again. "Nelson," she breathed, then stopped herself. Aldren, his real name. It seemed wrong to say it, as if speaking it aloud would change everything between them. When he stepped out from behind the door, he looked as though he had expected her. His posture was calm, controlled, but there was something in his eyes that showed a deeper, more raw emotion. "Aldren," she whispered, finally saying his name with the weight it deserved. "You've been hiding from me for so long. Why?" His gaze softened, and for the first time, he seemed vulnerable. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I never wanted to lie to you, Analyn," he said, his voice steady yet filled with an undeniable sadness. "But I knew the kind of life I lead, the people I deal with. I never wanted to drag you into it. I didn't want you to see me as just another powerful man, just another man with money and connections. I wanted you to see me for who I am, Nelson, the man who loved you." Her breath caught in her throat as his words washed over her. Was this really the man she had fallen in love with? Or was this the version of him she had only ever dreamed about? The man he had shown her was kind, gentle, and selfless. Could it be possible that the man he truly was had been just as good? "I loved you, too," she whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "But you never gave me the chance to understand you. You never gave me the truth." Aldren reached for her, his hand gently lifting her chin to meet his gaze. His eyes held a mixture of regret and longing. "I never wanted to hurt you, Analyn. I wanted you to be happy, no matter what it took." Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she couldn't stop them. All this time, she had been angry with him, angry for his lies, for his secrets. But now she wasn't sure what to feel. She had loved him before, and somewhere deep down, she still did. "You never had to protect me from the truth, Aldren," she said softly. "I loved you for who you were, not for what you had." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close as if to make up for all the lost time. The rain outside seemed to soften, the storm inside them both beginning to quiet. The weeks that followed their reunion were filled with both joy and struggle. Analyn had been overwhelmed by Aldren's world, a place that seemed so far removed from everything she had known. The billionaire life he led was full of dangers, lies, and betrayals, but it was also a life he was trying to escape. As they spent more time together, Analyn learned just how complicated Aldren's world really was. He had enemies, powerful people who wanted to take him down, but through it all, he never once hesitated to love her, to show her just how much she meant to him. Still, there were moments when the weight of his past would rear its ugly head. And when those moments came, it was as if the old Nelson, the one she thought she had lost forever, would surface, and they would find themselves caught in the whirlwind of emotions. But for every challenge they faced, their love grew stronger. Aldren had made his mistakes, and so had she. But now, they were finally learning how to navigate the treacherous waters of their relationship, learning to trust each other with their hearts once again. And as the days went by, Analyn knew that no matter how difficult it had been, no matter how much pain they had endured, they had found their way back to each other. And maybe, just maybe, their second chance was the one that would last forever. As the days passed, the distance between Aldren and Analyn began to fade, but with it came the realization that rebuilding trust would take time. Despite their heartfelt reunion, the scars of the past remained, especially for Analyn. She struggled with the weight of everything that had transpired, the lies, the secrets, and the betrayal she had felt when she first uncovered Aldren's true identity. It wasn't easy to simply move past it. But Aldren, with his quiet persistence and unwavering love, was determined to prove that the man she had loved all along was still the same. The only difference now was that he was finally letting her in, giving her pieces of himself he had kept hidden for so long. They spent countless hours talking, more than they ever had before. But even the quiet moments weren't without their challenges. There were nights when Aldren would retreat into himself, lost in thoughts of his dangerous world, the threats he couldn't escape. And during those times, Analyn would remind him gently, yet firmly, that she was no longer the same woman she had been before. She wasn't afraid of his world. She wanted to stand by his side, even in the face of the storms. "I never wanted to put you in danger," Aldren confessed one night as they sat by the fire in his luxurious mansion, his voice heavy with guilt. "But you're right. I can't keep pushing you away. I need you, Analyn. I've always needed you." She reached across the table and gently cupped his face, her touch soft but sure. "And I need you, Aldren. All of you. Even the parts you think I can't handle." He smiled faintly, his eyes softening as he looked at her with admiration. "I don't deserve you." "You do," she replied quietly. "You just need to let yourself believe it." The moments like these were the ones they would come to cherish, when the storm inside them calmed, and they found solace in each other's presence. But they both knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be this peaceful. The weight of the truth began to sink in for Analyn. She had always known Aldren had a world far removed from hers, but the reality of what that meant was beginning to unfold. His enemies weren't just faceless figures behind a corporate desk. They were dangerous individuals who wouldn't hesitate to hurt anyone to get to him. As Analyn stood in the midst of Aldren's complex life, she couldn't ignore the fears that lurked beneath the surface. She had loved him with all her heart before, but now the stakes were higher. Now, there were real consequences to their love. It wasn't just about two people finding their way to each other. It was about survival, trust, and the strength to face the challenges ahead. One evening, as they walked along the beach, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore filled the air. Analyn looked up at Aldren, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes were constantly scanning the horizon. The world he lived in was never far from his mind. "I'm scared," she admitted softly, her voice barely audible over the waves. "I'm scared of losing you, of losing everything we've worked so hard for." Aldren stopped walking, his eyes searching hers with a depth that almost took her breath away. He placed a hand on her shoulder, pulling her close. "You won't lose me, Analyn. I'll do whatever it takes to protect you. But you need to trust me." "I do trust you," she whispered. But even as she said the words, doubt lingered. Could she trust him enough to risk everything? Could she truly live in this world of danger and power, knowing what was at stake? Aldren seemed to read her thoughts, his expression softening. "I'll never put you in harm's way again. I promise." The promise hung in the air between them, both of them uncertain but willing to take the leap. Their lives took a sudden turn when Aldren's enemies began to move in the shadows. It was a world of whispers and unseen threats where nothing was ever as it seemed. For Analyn, the discovery of how deep Aldren's past truly was both enlightening and terrifying. The lengths his enemies would go to in order to break him were unimaginable. But still, he continued to fight, never wavering, never showing weakness. And yet, in this dangerous game, it wasn't just Aldren who was targeted. His enemies now had their sights set on Analyn. The love they shared became the ultimate weapon, a weapon they would use against him if given the chance. One evening, after a tense meeting with Aldren's lawyer, where the gravity of the situation became clear, Analyn sat alone in their bedroom, her heart heavy with fear. She had come to terms with the fact that their love was far from ordinary. But was she truly ready to face what lay ahead? The risk, the fear, the uncertainty? Aldren entered the room quietly, his footsteps light on the carpet, and approached her slowly. His eyes softened as he looked at her. "You're worried." "I'm not just worried," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm terrified. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us." He sat beside her, pulling her into his arms as he had done so many times before. This time, though, there was an urgency to his embrace. "You're not going to lose me. I won't let anyone take you away from me. But you need to know, this isn't going to be easy. I can't promise it won't get harder before it gets better." "I don't care about the hardships, Aldren. I care about us, about being with you. But how can we survive this?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "We'll survive together," he said firmly, his words carrying the weight of a promise that would carry them through the darkest of times. And for the first time in a long time, Analyn felt the warmth of hope in her chest. As the tension between them and Aldren's enemies escalated, Analyn found herself becoming more entwined in his world than she had ever imagined. There were close calls, moments where their lives were on the line, but through it all, their bond only grew stronger. But just as things seemed to calm, a twist of fate came that would change everything. Aldren's past, the one he had tried to keep hidden, came crashing down. Betrayal from within his inner circle threatened to tear them apart, and with it came the question of whether their love could truly survive the test of time and danger. The shock of betrayal hit harder than anything Analyn had ever experienced. It wasn't just the enemies outside that posed a threat now. It was someone from within Aldren's trusted circle, his most loyal ally, someone who had stood by him through thick and thin, had turned against him, selling out to his rivals for a price. As Aldren paced back and forth in his office, his expression darkened with fury. He'd never expected it. Betrayal from someone he considered family was the most devastating blow of all. But even in the midst of his anger, there was a part of him that was grateful for Analyn. She had never wavered, never shown fear, even in the face of this new danger. She sat across from him, watching him silently, her gaze filled with concern. "We'll figure this out together," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "You're not alone, Aldren. We've come this far. We won't back down now." Aldren stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "You still want to be with me, after everything that's happened? After everything I've dragged you into?" "Of course," she replied without hesitation. "I'm with you, Aldren. You're not just some businessman or some secret billionaire to me. You're the man I love, and nothing changes that." Her words melted the tension in his chest, even if just for a moment. He stepped forward and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "I can't promise it won't get worse, but I can promise you this: I will always fight for us, for you." She smiled softly, a tear escaping her eye. "Then we'll fight together." As they prepared for the storm ahead, Aldren and Analyn knew the stakes had never been higher. The threat from within his circle, coupled with the relentless pursuit of his enemies, was enough to bring even the strongest to their knees. Yet, as always, Analyn remained steadfast, her heart determined not to let fear control them. The days grew increasingly tense as Aldren made plans to expose the traitor and secure his empire. But the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous the game became. There were whispers in the shadows, people watching their every move, and every step they took felt like they were walking on a tightrope. Analyn, though frightened, remained by his side, even when the pressure seemed unbearable. It was during one of these late nights, as they worked tirelessly to uncover the full extent of the betrayal, that Aldren finally opened up to her in a way he hadn't before. "I've never let anyone in," he admitted quietly, his eyes meeting hers in a rare moment of vulnerability. "Not fully, not even you, despite everything we've shared." She sat next to him, gently placing a hand on his arm. "You don't have to carry this alone, Aldren. I'm here, and I always will be." He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and something deeper, something more raw. "I don't deserve you, Analyn." "Yes, you do," she said firmly. "You've always deserved love, even if you didn't think so." As the web of betrayal unraveled, Aldren and Analyn found themselves facing not just the external threats, but the emotional scars that had been left behind in the wake of their tumultuous journey. They had always known their love would be tested, but nothing could prepare them for the harsh reality of a world that sought to destroy everything they held dear. The emotional toll was heavy, especially for Aldren, who had always tried to protect Analyn from his dangerous world. But now, there was no escaping it. They had to face the truth about the people around them, the lies that had been told, and the secrets that had been kept. One evening, after another round of tense meetings with his security team, Aldren sat on the edge of the bed, his hands running through his hair in frustration. He looked up to see Analyn standing in the doorway, watching him with a quiet intensity. "I hate this," he said, his voice filled with anger and helplessness. "I hate that I've brought you into this world. I hate that you're in danger because of me." Analyn stepped into the room, walking slowly toward him. "I knew what I was getting into, Aldren. You didn't force me into this. We chose this together, and now we face it together." She knelt before him, her hands gently cupping his face. "I love you, and I'm not going anywhere." He closed his eyes at her touch, the weight of his fears and regrets melting away, if only for a moment. "I don't deserve you." "You do," she whispered, her voice firm, "and I'll remind you of that every day." The final confrontation with Aldren's enemies came quicker than they had expected. But even with all the preparation and strategy, the stakes were still higher than they had ever imagined. With every move Aldren made, the danger escalated. As the tension reached its peak, Aldren and Analyn found themselves standing together at the precipice of everything they had fought for. The battle was far from over, but they had finally reached the point where they could take back control of their lives. "You're my strength," Aldren said, his voice filled with raw emotion. "I couldn't do this without you." "And you're mine," Analyn replied, her voice unwavering. "We'll face whatever comes together." The culmination of their efforts brought them to the heart of the storm. Aldren, Analyn, and their team worked tirelessly to bring justice, expose the traitor, and dismantle the empire of their enemies. It was a battle that tested not just their love, but their resilience, their trust in each other, and their ability to overcome the darkest of times. As the dust finally settled, Aldren and Analyn stood together, battered but victorious. Their love had withstood the fire, and now they were free to rebuild their future together. "I'll never let you go again," Aldren whispered as they embraced, his arms holding her tightly. "This is our time." "It always was," Analyn replied, her heart full of love and hope. Together, they stepped into the future, stronger than ever, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. The morning after the final confrontation was quiet, eerily so. It felt like the calm after the storm, where everything had settled, but there was still the weight of everything that had happened hanging in the air. Aldren and Analyn had fought so hard to reach this point, and yet, as they sat together in the quiet of his study, neither of them could bring themselves to speak at first. Aldren stared out the window, the early morning sunlight casting a warm glow over the city below. His thoughts were a swirl of both relief and lingering uncertainty. He had won back his empire, exposed the traitor, and made sure that the people who had tried to destroy them would pay for their actions. But the biggest victory, the one that truly mattered, was the one he had with Analyn. His heart felt lighter than it had in a long time, but there was still a gnawing fear. Fear that his enemies could rise again. Fear that he had put Analyn in danger, and that she might one day regret choosing to stay by his side. But as he looked at her now, sitting beside him in the soft light, he saw only strength. Her unwavering loyalty had never wavered, even through the worst moments. The way she stood by him, always ready to face the storm, filled him with a sense of awe. He couldn't fathom how he had gotten so lucky. "Analyn," Aldren whispered, his voice soft but full of emotion. "You've been my anchor, my light, through all of this. I don't deserve you. You saved me, more times than you'll ever know." She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I chose to stay with you, Aldren. It wasn't a choice of obligation. It was because I love you, and nothing, not even the danger we faced, could change that." Her words warmed him, and he squeezed her hand. It was then that he realized there would always be danger, always be challenges, but with her by his side, he would be able to face anything. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. I promise you," Aldren said, his voice firm with resolve. In the weeks that followed, Aldren and Analyn worked to rebuild their lives. Though the immediate threats had been eliminated, they knew there would be new challenges on the horizon. Aldren's empire needed to be rebuilt, and there were still those who would seek to tear it all down. But they no longer feared the future. Together, they could handle anything. They made plans, strengthened their resolve, and began looking toward the future with new optimism. Aldren spent countless hours in his office, overseeing the revival of his business empire, while Analyn supported him every step of the way. But it wasn't just about business anymore. It was about creating something solid for the future they dreamed of. One night, as they sat together in the quiet of their home, Aldren turned to Analyn, a gentle smile tugging at his lips. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice playful yet serious. "About what?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "About us," he said, his expression softening. "And about the future. I've been so focused on rebuilding everything else that I forgot to focus on what truly matters, what I truly want." Analyn's heart skipped a beat. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, and her pulse quickened. "You," Aldren continued, "I want you by my side forever. No more games, no more waiting. I want us to build a life together, one without fear, without doubt. I want a future where we have everything we've ever dreamed of." Tears welled up in Analyn's eyes as she gazed at him. "Aldren, Will you marry me, Analyn?" Aldren interrupted, his voice filled with love and hope. "Will you marry me and make this life, our life, real?" The world around them seemed to disappear as Analyn nodded, her heart full of joy. "Yes, Aldren, I will marry you. I want nothing more than to build that future with you." Aldren's face lit up, and he pulled her into a tight embrace, his heart swelling with happiness. The battles they had fought, the challenges they had faced, had led them here, together, and nothing would ever tear them apart again. As Aldren and Analyn prepared for their wedding, the world seemed to fall into place. The chaos of the past was behind them, and they were finally able to enjoy the peace they had fought so hard to achieve. Their love was no longer just a flicker of hope. It was a bright, steady flame that would burn for years to come. The wedding day arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. Analyn stood in front of the mirror, dressed in a beautiful white gown, her heart racing. She couldn't believe how far they had come. From the betrayal, to the danger, to this moment. It felt like a dream. Her friends and family gathered around her, offering their love and support. And in that moment, she realized just how much she had changed, how much Aldren had changed her. He had given her a future she had never imagined for herself. When the ceremony began and Aldren stood at the altar waiting for her, she couldn't help but smile. He looked as handsome as ever, his eyes filled with pride and love. As she walked down the aisle toward him, Aldren's expression softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, everything felt right. They had overcome so much, and now they were here, together, ready to face the rest of their lives as one. The honeymoon phase was everything they had hoped for and more. Away from the pressures of work, away from the past, Aldren and Analyn took time to explore new places, to connect on a deeper level, and to just enjoy being in each other's company. The love they shared had become something undeniable, something that transcended everything they had been through. They didn't just survive the storm. They emerged stronger, more in love, and more certain of what they had. As they sat together on a secluded beach one evening, watching the sunset, Aldren pulled Analyn close, his voice a soft whisper in the wind. "We made it," he said, his heart full of gratitude. "Yes," Analyn replied, her smile radiant. "We made it together." The waves crashed gently against the shore, and for the first time in a long while, they both allowed themselves to simply breathe. The future was theirs to create, and they would do it together, side by side, hand in hand. Months had passed since their honeymoon, and life had settled into a rhythm. Aldren's business empire had flourished. Once again, and Analyn, ever the supportive partner, found her own voice in the world, carving out a path that allowed her to contribute meaningfully to the causes she cared about. Together, they made an unstoppable team. But even in the midst of their success, the shadow of the past still loomed. Aldren had enemies, old ones, new ones, and many who had been watching from the sidelines for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. He had learned the hard way that success could be a double-edged sword. One quiet evening, as they sat together in their penthouse suite overlooking the city, Aldren's thoughts turned dark. He knew that with the rise of his power, there would always be a danger of losing it all. And while he trusted in his ability to fight, there was one thing he knew he couldn't risk losing: Analyn. "Analyn," he began, his voice serious, "I've been thinking about our future. We've built something beautiful together, but we have to be careful. There are still forces that would love to see us fall. I can't let anyone take you away from me." Analyn looked up at him, her gaze steady, as if she could sense the weight of his words. "We've fought through so much, Aldren," she replied softly, "and I've chosen to be with you, no matter what comes. Together, we can face anything, but you need to remember that you're not alone. We're in this together." A warm smile spread across his face as her words sank in. He didn't need to carry the burden of the world on his own. He had her, his strength, his love, and his reason to keep fighting. And together, they would face whatever came next. The next few weeks were filled with activity, both joyful and tense. Aldren's business continued to thrive, but behind the scenes, he worked tirelessly to root out anyone who might pose a threat to the life he and Analyn had built. He knew the dangers of his world, and he couldn't afford to be complacent. But even as the threats mounted, there was a renewed sense of purpose in his every move. He wasn't just fighting for his empire anymore. He was fighting for their future. As for Analyn, she flourished in her own right. She had started a foundation dedicated to helping disadvantaged children, and it quickly became a cause she was passionate about. Her growing influence in the philanthropic world allowed her to reach people in ways she had never imagined, and it gave her a new sense of pride and purpose. One evening, as they sat down to dinner together, Aldren could see the fire in Analyn's eyes, the same fire that had captivated him from the moment they met. He had watched her grow from the woman who once feared change to the one who embraced it with open arms. "You've come so far," Aldren said, his voice filled with admiration. "I'm so proud of you, Analyn." A smile curved her lips as she reached for his hand. "I couldn't have done it without you. You're my inspiration." They shared a quiet moment, the world around them, fading as they looked into each other's eyes. There was no need for words. They both knew that their love was the strongest force in their lives, and it would always carry them through the hardest of times. A few months later, the peace they had worked so hard to create was shaken. A new player had entered the scene. Someone with a vendetta against Aldren. Someone who wanted to bring him to his knees. And this time, it wasn't just Aldren's business that was at risk. It was Analyn's life. Aldren had kept his enemies at bay for years, but now one had slipped through the cracks. A shadowy figure from his past, with a deep grudge and a thirst for revenge, had begun targeting the people closest to him, and Analyn was the perfect target. One evening, after Aldren returned from a business trip, he found Analyn waiting for him at home, her face pale with worry. She had received a threatening message, one that made her blood run cold. It was clear that their enemies would stop at nothing to destroy what they had built. But Aldren wasn't about to let anyone threaten the life they had fought so hard to create. "Don't worry," Aldren reassured her, his voice calm yet filled with determination. "We'll handle this. No one will hurt you, I promise." "I know you'll protect me, Aldren," Analyn replied, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "But I won't let you fight alone. This is our fight now, too." Aldren was taken aback by her words. It was one thing to love someone, but to know that they were willing to fight alongside you in the face of danger, it was everything. "We're in this together," he whispered, pulling her into an embrace. "And I'll never let anything happen to you." The battle with their enemies raged on for several weeks. It was a tense, dangerous time. Aldren and Analyn moved carefully, always one step ahead, but the constant threat of danger weighed heavily on both of them. They knew that in this world, peace was temporary, and the fight for survival was never truly over. One night, after a particularly close call with one of Aldren's enemies, they sat together on the balcony of their penthouse, the city lights flickering below them. It was a moment of quiet in the midst of chaos, and they both knew that the coming days would be pivotal. "I love you, Aldren," Analyn said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I love you more than I can express, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to protect you and our future." Aldren turned to her, his heart full of love and gratitude. "And I love you, Analyn. You've shown me what it means to truly live, to truly fight for what matters. And I'll always be by your side, no matter what." They both knew that the future was uncertain, but with each other, they had everything they needed to face whatever challenges came their way. The storm was far from over. With each passing day, Aldren and Analyn's enemies seemed to grow bolder, their threats more sinister. But Aldren's resolve remained unshaken. No matter how many forces tried to tear them apart, he knew they would stand strong together. Analyn, once a woman hesitant to embrace change, had become a fierce protector of everything they had built. She was no longer the passive observer. She was an active participant in their mission to safeguard their lives and their love. The woman he had fallen for, the woman who once feared the consequences of ambition, was now one of the most formidable forces in his life. Aldren couldn't help but admire the strength she exuded, even during their darkest moments. She had become his rock. One evening, after a tense meeting with one of his business partners, Aldren returned home to find Analyn waiting for him with dinner set out on the table. Her calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the storm swirling outside, but it brought him the comfort he needed to push through the day's challenges. "I was thinking about our future," Analyn said, her voice steady but filled with excitement. "When all of this is over, I want us to travel, just the two of us, to places we've never been. I think we deserve a break." A warm smile tugged at Aldren's lips as he took her hand in his. "I'd love that," he said softly, "but we'll get there. Together. I promise you." Their eyes locked, and in that moment, they knew they would face whatever came next side by side. Whatever the future held, they would meet it head-on, just as they always had. The tension reached a breaking point when one of Aldren's enemies took matters into their own hands. A public attack, orchestrated by those who sought to ruin him, rocked the city. The scandal was everywhere, on the news, in the tabloids, and on social media. It was a calculated attempt to destroy not just Aldren's reputation, but also his relationship with Analyn. The media painted a picture of Aldren as a villain, a corrupt businessman who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. They claimed he was involved in shady dealings and that Analyn was nothing more than a pawn in his game. The lies were vicious, and the public opinion was quickly turning against them. But Aldren refused to be dragged down by their lies. He wasn't going to let anyone take Analyn from him, not without a fight. "I'll handle this," he said to Analyn, his voice filled with determination as he clenched his fists. "I won't let anyone turn you against me." "I know you will," she replied, her voice full of strength. "But we can't fight this battle alone. We have to face it together." And so they did. With everything at stake, Aldren and Analyn worked tirelessly to clear their names. The battle was fierce, but it was theirs to win. They uncovered the truth behind the attack and exposed those who had orchestrated it. Slowly, they rebuilt their reputation, fighting back against the lies and the false narratives. Throughout it all, their bond grew stronger. No matter how many attacks they faced, no matter how much the world tried to tear them apart, they remained united. They were unstoppable together. Weeks turned into months, and finally, the dust began to settle. Aldren's enemies had been exposed, and justice had been served. The world slowly began to see the truth. Aldren and Analyn were not the villains they had been painted to be, but rather two people who had fought for their love and their future. With their reputation restored, they took the opportunity to enjoy a much-needed break. As promised, they traveled the world, visiting the places they had always dreamed of. From the bustling streets of Paris to the serene beaches of the Maldives, they explored the world together, creating new memories and deepening their bond with every step. But the challenges they had faced only made their love stronger. They had been tested in ways they never expected, and yet they had emerged victorious, with a love that was unbreakable. On one quiet evening, as they watched the sun set over the ocean, Aldren took Analyn's hand in his. "I can't imagine my life without you, Analyn," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "You're my everything, and I'll always fight for you, no matter what." Tears glistened in Analyn's eyes as she squeezed his hand. "And I'll always fight for you, Aldren. You've shown me what true love is, and I'll never let you go." As the sun dipped below the horizon, they shared a quiet kiss, knowing that their love had survived the storm. And no matter what the future held, they would face it together, united, strong, and ready for anything. The day was quiet, but it was filled with unspoken promises, the kind that only two people who had endured storms together could understand. The sun had just set behind the horizon, casting hues of orange and pink across the sky. The soft hum of the ocean filled the air, mingling with the scent of salt and the soft whispers of a gentle breeze. For the first time in what felt like forever, Aldren and Analyn were able to simply be. No pressures, no schemes, just the peace they had fought so hard for. Sitting on the edge of a secluded beach house overlooking the ocean, Aldren reached over and gently cupped Analyn's face in his hands. Her eyes met his, eyes that had once been filled with uncertainty, now shining with a quiet strength and unshakable love. "You know, I never imagined we'd be here," Aldren said, his voice soft but filled with sincerity. "I always thought I would protect you, keep you safe from the dangers of my world. But in the end, you were the one who saved me, saved us." A smile tugged at Analyn's lips as she placed her hand on top of his, her fingers tracing the lines of his palm, like she was memorizing him, as if she could never get enough. "I didn't save us, Aldren," she said softly. "We saved each other. You might have kept me safe from the world outside, but you also kept me grounded when everything felt impossible. I never would have survived without you. It was always you." Aldren chuckled softly, his thumb brushing against her cheek. There was something incredibly grounding about their love. Their journey together had been nothing short of a war at times, battling forces bigger than both of them. Yet, despite all of it, here they were, stronger than ever. "I'm not letting go, Analyn, no matter what," Aldren vowed quietly. She nodded, her hand resting over her heart. I know. I've learned to believe you, Aldren. You've shown me the meaning of true love and commitment, and I'm never letting go either. We fought too hard for this." The sound of waves crashing on the shore seemed to echo their words, amplifying the truth of them. Aldren kissed her forehead softly, savoring the moment, the peace they had found after everything that had happened. Their past had been filled with doubts, lies, and betrayals, forces that had threatened to tear them apart. Yet, in the face of every hardship, they had risen together, their love never wavering. Now, with the storm of their past finally over, they could look ahead at a future that, for once, seemed truly theirs. There were no secrets between them anymore, no questions left unanswered. Aldren had told her everything about his hidden identity, about the battles he'd fought in the shadows, the people who had sought to destroy him, and the sacrifices he had made to protect her. And through it all, Analyn had been by his side. Through the uncertainty, through the dangers, through the heartbreaks, they had held on to each other. "I don't want to live without you, Analyn," Aldren said, his voice cracking slightly, as if the weight of his emotions had been held back for so long, finally spilling over. "I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you when I pushed you away, but you have to know, every time I hurt you, it was because I was terrified of losing you." She looked into his eyes, seeing the depth of his regret, the sincerity that had always been buried beneath his tough exterior. She took his hand in hers, squeezing it gently. "I know, Aldren, and I understand. I've been afraid too. Afraid that everything we built would crumble, but we made it through. Together." She smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And we'll keep making it through, whatever comes next." The words hung between them, not as a promise, but as a declaration of their unyielding commitment to each other. They had faced the world's wrath, survived its worst, and now they could finally exhale, knowing that nothing could break them. They were stronger than the forces that had tried to tear them apart. Aldren pulled her closer, his arms enveloping her in warmth. "I love you, Analyn," he whispered, his lips grazing her ear. "I've always loved you, even when I didn't know how to show it." "I love you too, Aldren," she whispered back, "with everything in me." They stood there for a long moment, simply holding each other, their hearts beating as one. For the first time in their lives, there was no need for words. The silence between them was a conversation all its own, filled with trust, love, and understanding. As the night unfolded, they made plans for the future, dreams of building a life together that was beyond anything they had ever imagined. They spoke of their travels, of the places they would visit, and of the life they would create once all the dust had settled. But in that moment, it wasn't about the future. It was about the now, about cherishing the moment they had together, without any interruptions, without any worries. Aldren knew there would always be challenges ahead. His world wasn't one where peace came easily. But with Analyn by his side, he felt invincible. She was his anchor, his strength, the one person who could bring him peace in the chaos of his life. And in the years to come, when they looked back on this moment, they would remember how they stood on that beach, the world at their feet, and they would know that they had overcome everything together. Their love was an unbreakable force, one that no power, no enemy could ever destroy. They would keep fighting, not for the world, but for each other. And in doing so, they would prove that love was the most powerful weapon of all. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.